Hello and welcome to Between the Lines, a podcast where we look between the lines from this past Sunday sermon here on the Hill. I am your host, Micah McCoy, joined this week by our very own Pastor Aaron, and we are so glad that you are tuning in with us this morning. Yes. This past week, we continued our series called Stretch, brought to us by our very own Pastor Chris White, who is leaving us.
He is leaving us.
Tear emoji, sad face.
Yeah.
We're all sad about it. So he wasn't able to join us for the podcast today because he's packing up.
He bailed us on the podcast.
He's bailing on us.
But he's packing.
He's packing.
So it was like, do we go help him pack or do we shoot the podcast? And we decided we'll shoot the podcast.
We decided we have priorities.
Yes.
No, I'm helping him on Friday.
Yeah, okay.
I'm helping him on Friday. So I thought it'd be fun to start out with some fun Chris White stories.
Okay.
I came on as an intern here at Victory Hill, and Chris White was my boss.
Yeah.
So I've got all sorts of fun stories.
You have all fun kind of stories.
Yeah.
Do you remember the very first time you met him?
Well, he actually taught a Bible study when I was in high school.
When you were in high school?
When I was in high school here in Lancaster.
So you're saying he's like a lot older than you, huh?
I'm not saying that he's old, but I am also not saying that he's young.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
So I can neither confirm nor deny any of that.
I did not realize he taught a Bible study when you were in high school.
He did. Yeah. I was in high school at Lancaster High School, and they had a Bible study I taught a Bible study after school.
Okay.
But they had one during lunch that I also attended.
Okay.
And Pastor Chris and all the other youth pastors taught it.
Yeah.
And so I had met him a couple times. So I didn't really remember him.
Oh, you didn't really remember him?
So. I mean, I remembered his face, and I was like, that's a guy from a Bible study I went to.
Okay.
But I was like, I don't know his name.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I know him from that. And then fun Chris White story is that Chris actually told me he would not be my friend.
That's not very Christ-like, is it?
It is not very. No, his name is Christopher. There's Christ in his name.
And so he told you directly to your face he would not be your friend? He
told me, I was his intern, and we were hanging out. We were having all these like spiritual deep discussions.
Yeah.
And I was like, Chris, can we be friends? He told me no.
He told you no?
He told me no.
Like, why is that? What was
I don't
his
know
reason?
why.
Did you ever ask him?
It became a joke. It was like he was joking with me, but I took it very seriously. Because sometimes I can't take jokes. So I took it very seriously, and I was like, okay.
He told you would not be your friend.
Yeah, so then sometimes I would just sing like, why can't we be friends? We're going to get monetized. Demonetized for this video.
Mute
because
that part of that,
that
podcast.
Right, but yeah, I would go around singing that song, Fun Story About Chris White.
Wow.
Yeah, do you have any fun stories about Chris White?
I mean, there's probably a lot over like 7 years. Like I remember when I first met him or whatever, like when we were interviewing, like I had a phone conversation with him, like I was doing kind of like all like okay, are we going to interview these people or not? You know, and so I remember that. And honestly, when we first called him, we were like, I don't know if this is going to work out. And let me tell you why though. Because I kind of remember.
Okay.
They lived in Mississippi.
Sure.
And so the thought or the concept that we were going to have to pay somebody to come up and like interview from Mississippi, I was like, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So
sure.
You
were like, I'm
very like budget.
That.
Yeah, I was like, we don't need to interview him, you know? So like, we kind of interviewed him once and then we were like, I don't know. And then we interviewed him again. And then in the interview, like I was talking to him, I was like, okay, so if we wanted to bring you up, what does this look like? All this kind of stuff. And I was like, I guess we could fly you and all that kind of stuff. And he's like, we can drive. And I'm like thinking in my head, I'm like, this is going to save me money, So we saved money.
He was already saving you money.
He was already saving me money.
That's good. That's a good sign.
It was a good sign to start, only to realize that down the road he would not be saving money, we did things like build up our youth budget and stuff like that. He spent it all in like in 2 weeks, man. Like we worked like dime a dog nights and he like spent it all in like 2 weeks. And
they love
to
make fun of Chris and tell everyone that he likes to spend money.
Yeah, we do.
But he used it for good.
He did use it for good. It was all legitimate stuff.
It was all legitimate
stuff like that.
Stuff.
And then I remember we used to give him a hard time we went to a conference.
Yeah.
And Chris was like, I'm bringing my guitar,
Yeah.
And so you bring your guitar to stuff though too,
I do
right?
bring my guitar to stuff.
So I don't play anything, So he's like, I'm bringing my guitar. And I was like, how much is it going to cost me for baggage? He's like, well, I'm not going to bring a carry-on. And so he brings his guitar. And I don't think he ever got it out the whole time we were there.
No.
But we were in the Atlanta airport and he swears up and down that he met David Crowder. So you know who David Crowder is.
He's the guy who wrote How He Loves.
Oh, How He Loves and stuff like that. So, big musician there. And he has his guitar. So Chris is carrying his guitar through it. And I'm like, you met David Crowder? I was like, did you have him sign your guitar?
Yeah.
He's like, no. And I was like, are you sure that you really met David Crowder? Because your guitar would be so much more cooler if you had David Crowder's signature on it. Yeah. And so
he's not here to defend himself. So he's not. He didn't meet David
I don't think he did either. Because wouldn't you take the opportunity if you had like your guitar there?
Sure.
And you met David David Crowder.
Yeah, the guy who wrote How He Loves.
Wouldn't you be like, hey, David?
Yeah.
Sign this for me real quick,
Dave,
man.
buddy, pal.
Yeah, he's like, we talked about all these other things. And I was like, nope, I don't think you ever met David Crowder. I think it was a lookalike.
I think it was a lookalike as well, and Chris just wanted to sound cool. I mean, I would have taken a picture with the dude.
Yeah, right?
Like, hey, David, let's get a pic.
He has no evidence. None.
No evidence.
So we don't believe that he ever met David Crowder.
I do not believe it.
I don't either. I don't either.
I don't believe it. But anyways.
Hey, it's sad that he's leaving, though.
Sad that he's leaving.
So he's
We're
been
all
here
sad.
Seven years, and he did some great things and invested into a lot of people's lives.
He invested into me for sure while he was here. And if it wasn't for him, I don't know if I would be married to my wife.
Oh, really? You're saying like he's responsible for that?
I don't know if I'd say he's responsible, but he did definitely strongly encourage me to be like, hey, you should think about liking Tabitha. And I was like, okay, let's just marry her.
So you went from like thinking just to marry, huh?
No, not really.
That was pretty quick.
Really, not really. But he did. He was great in my walk with God, and
that's awesome.
Helped me get into that.
That's awesome. How was your Memorial Day?
My Memorial Day was great.
Yeah,
having fun. Yeah, we went to my grandparents, and I got pelted by water balloons. My cousins, as soon as I got out of the car, started attacking me with water balloons.
Did you like? So is that like some like tradition or something like that?
Not tradition. They just hate me. I'm just kidding. They don't hate me. No,
it was a little cold. I mean, so like it wasn't like a water balloon type day.
Memorial Day was warm. The day before that, Sunday was cold. Yeah, but Monday was warmer.
It was a little bit warmer.
Yeah, it was nice.
Did you play any games?
They attacked me with
any cornhole, any like backyard games, any like competition?
I don't think I did.
No,
you probably did though, didn't you?
I did. I played the game that I dominated you at, and I told that story.
Okay.
You know, so
right.
You want to go?
If you missed last week's podcast, listen to it. You'll understand.
Yeah,
Pastor Aaron is highly competitive.
I'm highly competitive. And we played Bocce Ball this weekend.
We did play Bocce Ball.
Is that the first time you ever played Bocce Ball?
It is the first time that I played Bocce Ball.
So my team lost the first game.
Yes.
Did you guys lose the second game?
Yeah, I think I lost both times.
You lost both games?
Yeah.
Did you enjoy playing Bocce Ball?
I enjoyed playing. Yeah. Was I happy that I lost? No, I wasn't.
No, you can't ever be happy about a loss. But it was a fun game, right?
Yeah.
So there's a new summer game for you.
Bocce Ball.
Yeah.
You didn't know that was a game.
Yeah, you can buy
My grandpa told me that was like an Italian game or like a
I think it is.
French game or something.
They'll have them at like an Italian restaurant.
Yeah, I was trying to explain it to my grandparents when me and Tabitha went over there the other day, and he was like, "Oh yeah, Bocce Ball." He was like, "That's a whatever game."
It's actually a fun backyard game.
Yeah.
So you buy the set, and so you got a different terrain every time. You kind of play around the whole place.
Yeah.
So
Bocce Ball. Yeah. You should play it. If you're listening, never played it, you should play it.
Yeah. And usually I win, but
okay, Pastor Aaron. Let's move on.
Awesome.
Okay.
Awesome. Hey, we are in the series entitled Stretch.
Yes, we are.
And we've been kind of talking about our faith and how to grow that. And I hope that's encouraging people as they're listening of what does it look like to really kind of stretch our faith a little bit. And so Chris White did a great job Sunday just kind of sharing it, and it was kind of very timely for kind of his own story.
Yeah.
Talking about Abraham, right? And I mean, who doesn't like the story of Abraham? I mean, that's a great story.
Great story.
And just how he kind of walked out of everything, left everything behind and goes after God. And God says, "Hey, I'm going to show you a place." He doesn't give him any answers.
No.
And so I mean, Abraham's this individual in the Bible that we call him the father of faith. Like he kind of started this whole thing.
Yeah.
And so Chris kind of walked through that story and gave us some things just about faith.
Yeah.
And I mean, a couple of things that kind of stood out to me is he said at the very beginning, faith requires us to move without the details.
Yeah.
Have you ever felt like you've had a moment like moving without details, or like hey, this is what I'm supposed to do and I don't really know how it's going to play out?
Oh my gosh, multiple times in my life. I was raised in one church that I went to for 18 years of my life and was very, very connected there. And long story short, felt the Lord leading me to go somewhere else. Yeah. And I had no details of what I was going to do. And I just said, "Okay, God, I will do that." And I left, and it was like one by one, he showed me the next step, and then I got involved at OCU and started going there, switched colleges, and I mean, I didn't get much details. All I knew is that God wanted me to do one thing. Yeah,
it's kind of a scary place to be, isn't it?
It is a very scary place,
but it's that one step that we take, and that's I try to tell people a lot of times is that sometimes it is just in the single step that we take until we get the next step.
Yes.
And I don't know about you, like I'm a planner, like I'm a person of like detail, so I would prefer to see all 7 steps laid out in front of me. But sometimes God doesn't show us step 2 until we take taken step one.
Sure.
And we get so stuck, I think, in our faith sometimes.
Sure.
Because we're like, okay, God, like you got to show me the next step. But in the story of Abraham, we see he's just like, hey, I just want you to leave. And I'm not going to show you all the twists and the turns that are going to happen. You just got to leave. And if he had never actually taken that first step, he never would have seen all these promises come true in his life. And so I think when it comes to our faith, like this is just kind of the essence of it. We've always got to be willing to take whatever is the next step that God's asking us to take.
Sure.
Even if it's bold, even if it's courageous. Sometimes it seems really large. Sometimes it's kind of small. But are we willing just to take a step? And that comes from this place of obedience. And so, Chris even said, I think on Sunday, that faith is not a moment. Faith is a journey.
Yeah, that was good.
And I think that's very powerful, that you're not going to just be like, oh, I had a moment of faith. It's a journey of faith, you know? And like, I think when I look back over my life, like this is really the story of it, like it's not just been like, oh, I made one faith-filled decision and now it's good. Like, it's decision after decision to just kind of continue to live with God throughout this journey that he has, And so I think for my story is very similar. Like, at 18 knew there was a call in my life to do ministry. Didn't know exactly how that was all going to play out. And had my eyes set on going away to college, kind of the 18-year-old, like, hey, let's get away from home. Let's, we're going to go here. Yeah. And that's kind of the plan I thought I had, and lo and behold, got a small soccer scholarship to play locally and was like, okay, I'm gonna move in that direction. And then an opportunity opened up at the church to kind of do youth ministry. And I was like, okay, God, this seems like the next step that you want for me. And just continue to take steps, even coming here was like a step, and just going, okay, God, I'm going to take a step into moving away from family, moving away what's comfortable. And I'm going to come here and do youth ministry. Took a step into moving out of youth ministry. And that was like a big step. Like, like at that time, we didn't have like another position in the church, and I was just kind of like, hey, I feel like God's telling me that this season of youth ministry is over, and I'd love to be here doing this. And I had to go to people, I had to go to our elders and leaders and go, like, there's another step that I feel like God's calling me, whether it's here or somewhere else. Like, I'm just surrendering to what he has next for me, and a door opened here. And so, if you look back over your life, or if those that are listening just kind of look over their life, if they'll see it, I think they'll see a journey, hopefully that they've taken with God, and those steps that he's taken. So,
And something as I read that, and as you were talking there, something that just kind of came to my mind is throughout that journey, I think we have to be focused on the journey, like big picture stuff, but I think we have to be faithful in the moment.
That's good, Micah.
So I think we have to be focused on the journey, seeing the big picture, but faithful in each moment of the journey. Yeah. Because in each moment of the journey, you're not going to see how it's all going to work out. So you have to be focused on the fact that the bigger picture, God has taken me here. God has planted this vision or this burden in my life, and He's gonna see that come to pass. But right now, in this specific moment, in this specific season, I need to be faithful. Yeah. And it's through that faithfulness in the moment that God ends up bringing you through the journey that He has for you.
That's so good, and faithful in the moment. I think that's so powerful. Let me even add to that when we think about the story of Abraham a little bit. Is that I think some people get derailed where maybe they've missed that faithful in the moment opportunities. That makes sense?
Sure.
Like, maybe they feel like they made a decision and they're like, okay, I made this decision 10 years ago and this has derailed the journey or the promise or the dream that God's placed in my heart.
Right.
Like, don't get knocked off of the journey that God has for you.
Sure.
Maybe you missed the faithfulness in that one moment where you're like, man, I didn't honor God the way that He had asked me to, whether it was a decision or choice or mistake that you made, but that does not derail the whole journey that He has for you. That you can get back up and you can be faithful in the next moment that He calls you to. And I think about Abraham's story. I think about him with Sarah's laughing about a child, and it's like, I don't know in that moment if they were faithful to, to the big picture that God had for him, but God with His loving grace kind of steps back in and says, hey, there's grace in this moment. When they're with the king and Abraham looks at him and says, this is my sister. And like, this wasn't like a faithful moment to God to go, God, I trust you. And like, I believe that your best is going to be for me. But God was still, God allowed them to be picked up with grace and to walk back into the next faithful moment that God had for him. And I bet you there's people that are listening today that they may look at the course of their life and feel like, man, I've blown it somewhere.
Sure.
And like, I believed God had great things in store for me, but I don't know if God still does because I missed a moment or whatever. If you've missed a moment, get back up and live faithful in the next moment.
And I think that is so sad when people get they let that lie consume them.
Yeah.
Because I've met so many people that feel that way.
Yeah,
like,
right.
oh, I was passionate about God in my youth,
Yes.
or God called me to preach, or God called me to do ministry, or called me to be a doctor, or be whatever when I was a youth. And now when they're 30, 40, or whatever years old, they're like, I've lost that somehow.
Exactly.
And the reality is God never lied.
No.
You've just fell off track.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is get back on track.
Yeah.
Reroute yourself, and God's promise is still there.
Yeah.
You just have to reach back out for it.
And be faithful again in that next moment, and stop not being faithful to God in those things, So that's so good, Don't just focus on be faithful in the moments. And so whatever moment God has in front of maybe those that are listening today, just be faithful today, be faithful in the next thing that God's calling you to do, and watch how God unlocks that for you.
Yes.
Chris gave like a 4-step pattern, and I kind of wrote it down, and I don't know if you remember from service on Sunday, but he says faith requires obedience requires sacrifice requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires reliance on God. And faith is complete when there's reliance on God. And so this faith requires obedience. I mean, this is kind of the simplest place where faith kind of starts, I think,
Sure.
like, am I going to be obedient?
Yeah.
Whatever it is that God asked me to do, whether he says stay, go, move, don't move, be patient. Can I be obedient with whatever the voice of God is speaking to me, And we're a church that believes that God speaks, I don't know, I don't know about you, Micah. There's never been a moment in my life where I just I heard an audible voice from God,
Aaron, do this.
Or like woken up from my sleep and oh man, that was God's voice or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's consistent moments where I just know that this is the move of God. This is what God's speaking to my heart. And I think you've had those same encounters, you know?
Very much.
And so when we hear those voices, are we willing to step out in obedience to whatever it is that God's asking us to do?
Yeah.
And there's been times, I don't have to unfortunately say, there's been times that I'm like fighting those voices, no, God, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And then there's times that I've responded quickly and just said, okay, God, I've heard your voice and this is what I need to do. And so that first step of faith is really just a faith of obedience, and am I willing to walk that out? And I even think about like even the simple things, like, are we obedient just, maybe some people are listening are like, I don't know if I've ever heard the voice of God, you know. You've read his word though, and his, and so are you willing to be obedient to like how the word outlines how we should live life?
Exactly.
And if we are, that's kind of this first step is obedience.
And just like you're saying there, God's voice isn't always like something you audibly hear within your head. Yes, that happens for some people. And I've had that happen maybe once in my life. Like the rest of it though, God has spoken to me either literally just through reading the Bible. It's God's word. So like if you want God to speak to you, start by just reading God's word. It's not that complicated, and his word will speak to you. Study his word and it will speak. But then also God speaks sometimes through like other people confirming things in your life. Sometimes God has spoken to me by simply like letting things work out. For me, like I always wanted to attend a Christian college and go to school for ministry, and my mom would never want me to do it. she was like, Micah, that's dumb, that's foolish, like you're gonna waste the money, like ministry doesn't make a lot of money, you shouldn't do that. And when I took that step of faith though, and left the church I was at for 18 years, and I was like, Mom, I just feel the Lord calling me to just take this step, and I have no idea what this means to do next. She was like, you should go to OCU, Christian College. And get a minor in ministry. And I was like, what? You've never been supportive of this before. But I had to just kind of take that step, and then God then opened the door. And through my mom allowing me to do that, I believe that was God speaking to me. Like, hey, Micah, this is the next step. So sometimes just those things like that is kind of God working things out and speaking to us as well.
And just kind of walking in obedience. And then, he talked about then obedience requires sacrifice. And in this faith journey is always going to require some sacrifice, you know, whatever that may look like. Are you willing to sacrifice your own will and your own dreams? Are you willing to sacrifice maybe sometimes what everybody else says is crazy, when it comes to ministry sometimes, just like your mom said, are you willing to go, hey, God, I'm going to be obedient. I could go in a million other fields and make a lot more money, but that's not what you've called me to do. Like I'm willing to sacrifice in these moments. And so obedience is going to require sacrifice at sometimes. And so God may ask you to do things that you're like, I don't really want to do this, you know, but that's part of this faith journey is the sacrifice that we're making.
And then the next one that Chris said was that sacrifice often requires vulnerability. And I think that's where people get very, very uncomfortable.
We don't like to be vulnerable.
We don't like to be vulnerable. But in reality, that's because typically when we're vulnerable, sometimes people take advantage of us. And some people are afraid to be vulnerable because people have taken advantage of them because of their vulnerability.
Yep.
And the reality is, though, God will never take advantage of you.
No. Yeah.
He's always going to be there to help you through things. And if you just let yourself be vulnerable to him, he will be there for you.
Well, and I think that's the key, though, is, vulnerability is not... Vulnerability never feels safe.
Sure.
It only feels safe if it's with the right person.
Yes.
And so maybe there's somebody in your life, you're like, I'm extremely vulnerable with them because it's like, okay, they know everything about me. I know everything about them.
Yeah.
And I feel this is a safe place or whatever.
Sure.
But when it comes to our Heavenly Father, there should be this place where vulnerability is this safety net, because it's like, okay, God, you already know everything about me.
Sure.
You know every thought, you know every attitude, you know all my dreams and my hopes and stuff like that. And so, God, I'm going to get to this place where I'm going to be vulnerable with you. And that was kind of his fourth thing, that vulnerability requires a reliance on God. So this vulnerability isn't just about being vulnerable with everybody else around us. It's about being vulnerable to the one who guards our heart, protects our hearts, who wants the best for our future, who sees down the road. And that's what I love about God. I tell people all the time, he sees further down the road than we could ever see in our own eyes,
He does.
And so we might be looking, a block down the road and we can't see it, but God's looking miles down the road and going, hey, in this journey that I have for you, I want you to be vulnerable with me, because guess what? If you rely on me, I'm going to get you to where you need to be, even though you don't see it yet, and I think that's a place. And then so faith is complete when we have this reliance on God. And so I think that's such a truth that we have to hold on to.
Right.
And so, you kind of just kind of walk through this thing about faith and that part of it. Is there anything else that stuck out to you kind of from Sunday, Micah, or anything like that?
Just kind of the last point that, I'm looking at his notes here that was really good was he said, our faith is not the outcome of the situation. Our faith is not in the outcome of the situation, but the God who brings the outcome. Because I think often we get caught up on the outcome. Wanting the outcome to be a certain way. Yeah. But in reality, our faith is in God, the one who brings the outcome, the one who holds it all in his hands.
Yeah. And we see this with Abraham, as he takes his son to sacrifice him. Yeah. And I mean, sometimes that you go, is there more backstory to this thing? Like what else? What did they not tell us? In this thing, because I can't imagine, taking one of my kids and into that place, but this complete, utter dependence on God, and that God, your outcome is going to be greater than my outcome, and in that moment, in what seemed difficult and hard, God said at the last moment, I'm going to provide the sacrifice that you need, and I think that's the place of faith that's scary, because it's like, okay, God, I'm trusting, I'm still trusting, and even in the middle of trusting, it may not seem like it's going the way that you hope for, and I can tell you what happens in those moments. All the voices around you will look at you and say, you're insane, you're crazy, this is ridiculous, why are you doing those things, but can we trust the God that we serve, and can we trust God with the outcome of our life, and so even when it's in the natural eyes, it seems like this is just crazy. This doesn't seem like there's any wisdom in it. This doesn't seem like the right thing. But can I trust the God of the outcome? You know? Good. And when we do that in the last moments, he goes, hey, let me step in and let me show you my power at work. Let me show you my glory at work. Let me show the world something that's going to happen that you can never do on your own, so that you get no credit, but God gets all the glory for it.
That's so good.
And it's in those places that, man, our faith really starts to stretch. And so it's this complete dependence. On the only one who has our future in his hand, who knows the outcome of our future. And so we've got to let this faith muscle grow. I think the very first part of the series, I talked about how God's given everyone a measure of faith. Like no matter where you're at in this journey, there is a measure of faith that God's given you. Our responsibility is to take this measure of faith that God's given us and to just stretch it. So, for those that are listening today, stretch that faith a little bit, say yes to God in the very next thing that he's calling you to do. Maybe it's big or small. Maybe it seems out there to everyone else, but can you just take that measure of faith and stretch it a little bit further? And when we do that, our faith will begin to grow.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, that's all we have for you this week. If you're still watching, we would love to encourage you to like, comment, and subscribe. And we are so thrilled to talk to you each week. We will see you right back here next week on Between the Lines.